Hello, people. Welcome to another edition of A Dose of Drew. And tonight on Friday Night Knives, we are doing the Finch Flint. This is a fantastic little EDC knife that has a few things up its sleeve, as well as a few things that may or may not be really cool to you. First things first, some of the dimensions. This is a relatively smaller pocket knife, right in the 7 1/4 overall, with the 3-inch blade length, as well as slightly longer than that to the actual handle there. That going through. These are basics. This is obviously not, and it's not as the crow flies. All right, and the weight. This is the, really for me, this is the big one on this. It is stainless steel handles, not titanium. And that's where it's 4.01 ounces. Take some of the stuff off there, see if it comes back. Yeah, I got 1/100th of an ounce. That just keeps it from being even because it's got to be that way. But definitely some good things on this, but let's get through some of this other comparative size and dimensions. There it is next to a paramilitary 2. So you can see it is significantly smaller. And here it is next to a para 3 lightweight. As you can see, it's much, much closer to the para 3's size scale. All right, and then one more here. It is just a blur. As you can see, the hand space on it is very similar, even if the blade length is not, and not just any leak, but of course I screw it up by hitting the tripod, a random leak. Much closer to the leak in dimensions, as you may have seen by the actual measurements, but that helps bring it into focus. And the Benchmade bug out, as you can see, the bug out is very much similar in size, and the CVV Elementum, as you can see, also similar hand space, different, very similar blade length, even cutting edge. Overall, it has a lot of similar dimensions to those, in the good way, in that it takes a lot of the great things about these knives that you see as comparisons. So it has a lot of the great features, and this is how it compares to my Wiener. My Wiener is thicker and has a slight more curves, but I don't think it's heavier. All right, now let's get into the design, aesthetics, mechanics, noteworthy points, intended purpose, and the cost-value ratio, expectations, and any requests. First thing, the design. This is a fantastic design. It is clean lines, clean design lines that match all the way through from one to the next, and then flow from one element to the next, as well as being very, very well designed for its intended purpose, which is the human hand in cutting tasks. And it does it well in classic smooth lines. Really hard to get. And for those who don't know, the Finch has this fantastic little thing. We'll do this little side bit where they have this shield inlay that is actually made from glow-in-the-dark material. So it does charge and then glow in the dark. In fact, we may even be able to. Nope, camera doesn't pick it up nearly as good as you can see it with your eyes. But it is in there. Anyway, tried. So the ergonomic part of the design, you can get the saber grip, just enough room for my hand to be right behind the flipper tab. Just enough. I can spread my fingers out, get there. If you have really big hands, you can get the behind it. But for the saber grip, it's just enough for me to get in there and be comfortable. Large width, medium length, large size glove, except my fingers don't quite fill out the finger. Don't fill out the fingers in the glove. What can I say? So there we go. It does fit in that sense. And on the choke up, on the choke grip, or overhand grip, however you want to look at it, the flipper tab does provide a good resting point. It's not exactly a full choil, but it provides a decent resting point for your finger while you're at it. And if you want to get back in, while the clip point doesn't allow you to do the scoring, so well from here. You can, but it's not as good. But if you go back just a little bit and tuck that into your palm, you now have a very, very, very useful scoring blade with a lot of leverage and control, as well as tip and thrust control on it, giving it a lot of good areas to work with and fantastic ergonomics. The blade is of 154 cm steel, which great little steel for as part of the design. The ergonomics, this clip point swedge where you have the saber grind that's slightly over halfway high and a very, very aggressive and useful swedge. Ooh, in fact, almost just caught my finger with that clip point. That was a close one. I might even get some blood out of that. Nope, not on camera. All right. Very sharp out, as indicated by that reaction. Very sharp out of the box. 154 cm steel, great budget steel. This one is the Desert Ironwood inlays. It comes with several others. I like the wood. It definitely has good. If you've watched the unboxing, I really like the grain pattern that came on this one. See if I can show that. You can see there's a little bit of rough on the wood right there. That is not me. That actually came with that. And let's see if I can show. There's some other finishing marks on the wood. I think that is honestly just finishing marks on the wood. There's a little bit there that I may need to like try and smooth out, maybe even get some sandpaper on that to get that little mark out. Some little blemish in the wood that looks like it has more to do with grain and finish than anything else. Lets me know it's natural wood. And that will bring to, the aesthetics on this. Fantastic. When the design, the aesthetics, the lines, it looks like a knife. It does its job. It has these great lines to it that kind of just are classic, useful, and not many of the lines go without being used. That brings me back to the mechanics. I almost skipped over, so my apologies. It has great flipping action, but it is very much a light switch action, and you must be deliberate with it. You are not going to... Well, you can, but it doesn't really do it very well. Like the push button, you can do it. You can, but it tends to like the light switch, and there's jimping on the front just to do it. And you can make it fail. You have to be deliberate with it. It's easy to make it fail. So you really have to give it a little bit for a little bit of risk. You have to be quite significant in there. Could use a little bit of detent help, I would suppose. It would be the other way to say that. It shouldn't break out of the detent so easily without having enough energy to go all the way around. And that's probably the only thing to say. It's a deliberate action. It's not something that's difficult to fail. But at the same time, it works good. It works really good. You can't fail it. If you're used to some other things, gosh, do I have a liner lock even around here? Oh, here's one. So if you're used to something like the Fair and Force, where this is almost like I have to try to fail it. Much, much more than the Finch. Like that almost goes, and then a little bit of risk gets it. It's relatively easy to fail the Finch when it comes to the deployment. And my finger being on the lock bar doesn't help that bounce much. But if you're back and you pull it out, and if you're back on the handle and you pull it out of your pocket and you do the flip, it's going to work. It does have a really good detent. There's just a little bit of failure capability in there. And then there's this lock bar that has a little bit of a cutout here, nothing on the face, smooth stainless steel. It's great classic lines, no doubt about it, but at the same time, it does kind of make getting the lock bar in there a bit of a pain. Very smooth, very nice on the aesthetics. Makes it lacking just a little bit on the mechanics. And that's kind of where we want to get into some of these noteworthy points on it. It's a good classic knife. Extraordinarily well designed. The aesthetics, the lines, getting it all very well put together. The inlays. The inlay roughness is not felt with the hand. It's only visible in the light. And this machined pocket clip, while maintaining very, very deep carry right up to the crease there, also maintains the lines of the knife, which is actually really appreciated. It's not just there with all these lines, it's there to look like it's part of the knife. And it really does. It's 154 cm. And I think the most noteworthy point about this knife is something I'm going to tie into the intended purpose. This is a hard use pocket knife disguised as a fancy one. This is relatively thick blade stock. Right? It's not massive. It's not like cold steel or some of the others. But we'll measure it here just so we can get the exact bit. Zero it out. So this looks at 0.1135. This looks like it might have been 3 millimeter polished down or something like it. 0.11. Wow. Anyway, so there's that. But here's something else I want to get. The behind the edge is actually kind of thick. There. Right? 28 thousandths. That's pretty thick behind the edge, which gives it a really, really stout cutting profile. Right? That's thick behind that edge, but it also means that it's tough. Right? That's got some tough spin. Relatively thick wedge there. This is a fairly tough freaking piece of steel. And the bolster lock, all stainless. The liners, all stainless. Gives it a feeling of solidity that is more than its weight. It's very fancy. It's got fancy stuff. It's got this brush. The lines are really good and it looks really cool. This blade grind, as well as the geometry of it, is really a heavy use kind of geometry. You can really get this thing in there. And I'm not saying you can chop with it, but that's a pretty heavy duty lock bar too. This is a fairly solid heavy use knife disguised as kind of a fancy, I don't want to say decorative, but a sort of a fashion knife. It has good inlays, lots of good quality, all that stuff, but it really is a hard use daily. It's 154 cm. Good steel for it. You can use it in corrosive environments. Not necessarily acid, but salt, water, all stuff. You can get a little bit in there. It's relatively tough. It's relatively good at edge holding. It does a lot of the good things well. It's sitting there as a in the knife edge stuff triathlete, it's doing a pretty good job. And I think that's really what may or may not be taken by this knife. When I get, as far as the noteworthy points and intended purpose, is obviously an EDC, but it's kind of a heavy duty EDC knife. And that's, for the cost to value ratio, this knife is over $100 to buy. It's an American made knife with American components. So it's a little bit high on the cost to value ratio. But that's the part where I want to think about, where I want to talk about this a little bit. Not that other knives aren't built to last, but the real calculus of this knife is its overbuilt quality and just how long those dollars are going to last. It may or may not last longer than some of the Chinese knives you see, or some of the Italian or any of this. It may or may not last longer. It might not. That's absolutely for sure an unknown. The only thing you can know about that is that it's unknown. So the cost of value of this knife isn't the best, but it's not bad. Like, it is a high price, but the quality and the longevity of the engineering is extremely evident. So while the cost to value ratio isn't the greatest, its actual value is probably better than you might think. And that's where I'm going to jump into the expectations on this knife, because I expected it to be, quite honestly, more flash than substance, right? I expected this to be far more stylistic than substantive. And it's not. It's far more substantive than it is stylistic. The stylistic is there because it looks good and it does work good. But the substantiation of those looks and its whole attitude is that it's built well, and it's built with a heavy-duty use and that sort of stuff in mind in a small package, which is, quite honestly, hard to find. And that makes it a little bit unique, where you have the intended purpose, the cost, the value, the expectations, and all the noteworthy points about it, all essentially evolving around the same thing. And that this is a good, hard use EDC knife that has been put in fancy clothes. And it cleans up well. And that brings us to the nicer, the requests part. Is there something I would like different on this knife? Well, yeah, one, I would like a slightly stronger detent. I would like this to be less easy to fail in the action. It would probably get rid of some of that bounce too. You can do light switch, you can do push button, but there's almost always a bounce, and it's super easy to fail if you don't fully commit to the implementation of that action. And there's a lot of bounce on the thing, and I really think that has to do with a detent that isn't just well tuned. It has some really great action, but it's really easy to fail. So it's got a very narrow band of operation, which, unless you're, once you get used to it, it's not a thing. It's just super flickable, super fidgety. It does work quite a bit. But it takes a little bit of getting used to, and that's really where I would pull that in. A greater detent, and then again, something on the inside of this lock bar that gives my finger greater purchase, more surface area, and greater traction to make sure that it doesn't slip off at any time like that, and then have that fall on my hand. The traction outside on the inside of the lock bar would be probably the other thing. And honestly, I'm not as big a fan of the extra toughness afforded by the thickness behind the edge, but it has very well apex and extraordinarily sharp. In fact, I believe. Oh, that's a silly way to do it. I don't know if you can see that I'm shaving thin. Keep trying to make sure I keep her thin. There we go. Yeah, you can see all the curly cues from it shaven thin paper on that stock edge. It's very well apexed, even if it's a little thick. You see the curly cues, which means it's really making it go wide. Yeah, works really, really good. And there's not much else to request. A little bit of jimping maybe, but it would ruin the clean lines, which is definitely something that this thing has in very well. But a little bit of jimping on the back of this widening clip point would be nice, but it is definitely not required. But it would be one of the few things on the nicer, and that really kind of is all there is to ask about it. I mean, this thing is an EDC knife with heavy use, but I mean, let's be real. It is a package piercer, a saran wrap slicer, a cardboard carver, and an envelope eviscerator extraordinaire. But it's also something that you can really dig down in a pinch. You could take this on an outdoors trip as your sort of backup pocket knife, and it'll do it. It's got bearings in the pivot. It's got great action for the most part. A good steel that'll do what you need to, and that tough blade and the geometry on it means you can do things like food prep, slight bushcraft style, or around the camp sort of stuff, like rope cutting, all that stuff, while still having a good solid knife that isn't going to fracture or necessarily need a lot of sharpening during your trip or its use. And that really, really brings it home. That's what this is for. This is a relatively heavy duty small knife that's been put in really nice clothes and cleaned up, and it does it well. It's not, again, not the highest cost value kinds that brings it down. Has a cool little glow shield so you can find it in the dark as long as it's been in the light beforehand for a little while. And a lot of good things. And with that, it's really hard to say. It's not an outstanding. It's a 4-star knife. Again, is it a good value for it? I can recommend it. There are other knives that provide a better direct functional value, but this provides a style, a design, and knowing that it is 100% made in the USA gives it something that a lot of other knives can't. And it's not too far of a price difference for made in the USA knives. They're definitely competitive. And there you go. You give them the Finch and it'll do its job. And that's really where it comes down. It does its job. It does what it's supposed to do. It is a bladed tool and implement with some style and class that you can carry with you and then use in a pinch for a lot of different tasks. And it'll do the heavy duty hard tasks well. This will cut through heavy duty stuff like rubber, wood. I wouldn't suggest chopping with it, as it is still a flipper knife with things like a stop pin and actually I take that back. The stop pin is not a stop pin. It is the wings. It just goes through the blade. I'm trying to see if I can get that in there. I don't know if you can see the channels in there, but the stop pin actually goes through. And so there's one on each side that then nests in this very large and heavy duty stainless steel. So while it does have the two on there, I still don't recommend chopping. After all, it is a folding knife, but it's got some chops as far as heavy duty EDC goes. And there we go. 4 stars on it, you guys. It really, really is a good, pretty, but hard use and heavy duty EDC knife. It's not the lightest thing in the world, but if that isn't a concern for you, then this knife is something you should look at. It's not the cheapest thing in the world, but you get high value for that money, and it's made in the USA. So if that's important, then it really can outweigh the extra money. You're not losing anything. This is still a knife that will last you for probably a good portion of your life as a daily user and carry. You'll probably at least get 10 years out of it. So it's a lot of value, even though its price isn't that low. And then the rest of it is just damn nice. So there you go, guys. This has been another knife review. This one with the Finch Flint in 154 cm and the Desert Ironwood. So go ahead, take this video, watch it twice, comment as much as you like. Remember to like and subscribe. Be mindful of side effects. Remember, this has been your dose of Drew. I am said Drew, and you guys have a great rest of your night.